Welcome to Turbo News Breaking News Show. Listen to this article you can also read on turbonews.com.
Aloha and good afternoon. My name is Jürgen Steinmetz, joining you from the Breaking News Show in Honolulu. This morning with me is Paul Hudson. He is a frequent guest on our show, and he's, I believe, in Washington, D.C. with Flyers Rights. And Flyers Rights, of course, is an organization you really need when you travel and you have issues and problems. And he's the expert in problems. And he just told me we're going to have a really good Thanksgiving travel season. So tell us more about it. Welcome, Paul.
Sure. Well, as the saying goes, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So if you're going to be traveling by air, and domestically, we're looking at maybe 30 million people doing that in the next week. Internationally, I don't know what the number is, but it's certainly in the tens of millions. First, you can go to our website, flyersrights.org. There's a section called Know Your Rights that will give a lot more detail than what I'm able to cover in this brief interview. But if we can start with how you avoid the number one problem of air travel, which is delays. It's been that case for a long time. We have like 3 tips I would offer to people. First is, if you can, have direct early morning flights, because if your flight is canceled or excessively delayed, you have time in the day to make other arrangements. Later in the day or in the evening, you could be well stranded overnight. That could even last a couple of days or more. Second thing is, if you really have to be somewhere, it's hard to put off Thanksgiving and Christmas and things like that, birthdays, others, is you can have a backup cancelable reservation on another airline. You can't use the same airline because their software will screen you out. But you can, for perhaps 20% more, have a feature in another reservation as a backup that if you don't need it, you can cancel it and get a full refund. And if you do need it, it's there for you. A third tip is to build in an extra day. About a third of flights now are delayed, and many over an hour or more. And if you're making a connection, that can be a real problem. And between 1% and 5% flights are canceled. And that can really mean your delay will be hours to even days. Because the planes are full now, everyone in a canceled flight is not going to be able to get on the next flight. You might have to wait several flights. You might have to buy a ticket at another airline. So building an extra day in is another thing you can do. But let's suppose you are delayed. What are your rights? What is delay compensation available to you? Well, in the EU, that is for flights within the EU or to and from the EU, they have a program for 3 hours or more. You can get up to $700 in delay compensation. There is also something called the Montreal Convention, which applies to international flights. That can go up to $7,600. However, you have to make an application, and they make it very tough. Essentially, that will provide you for compensation for the things that you would otherwise be out of pocket for. Next thing is, what happens if your baggage is delayed or even lost? Well, you are entitled to get necessary expenses, things like toiletry and so forth. And the airline, in most cases, bags are not lost. They're normally just delayed. They have an obligation to deliver that bag to you. You shouldn't have to go back to the airport for it. There's a liability limit on baggage if they do seriously damage or lose your bag. Domestically, it's about $3,800 now. Internationally, it's about half that, about $1,700. And that's per person, that's not per bag. Then let's say the worst case happens and you are stranded in an intermediate place. There is something called the 3-hour rule. If you're on a plane on the tarmac, the airline has to let you out of the plane domestically after 3 hours. So you can make other arrangements, or you can still stick with the same airline. But previous to this rule, they would keep people on the planes for as long as 12 hours or more. Now, for international flights, it's a 4-hour number. And after 2 hours, you're supposed to get hydration. You're supposed to get snacks, food. The bathrooms have to work, things of that nature. But there's no actual compensation of that. If they violate the 3-hour rule, the airlines can be fined. And occasionally, some of the fine goes to the passenger, but you cannot count on it. There's also a matter of avoiding trouble with your baggage, especially, and with TSA. It used to be that almost all airlines had a 50-pound limit, but some have now reduced that to 40 pounds. You need to be aware of restrictions and extra rules that many airlines are now imposing, not just for the cost of the baggage check, but sometimes when you do the baggage check. There's one airline, Spirit, which actually has 70 different, what they call optional fees. And it's like a minefield to avoid these fees. The fees can easily add up to more than the ticket. Finally, for long-haul flights, there is a problem with DVT, or deep vein thrombosis. If you're sitting immobile in a seat for more than an hour or so, what happens is blood clots build up in your legs. Now, normally these things go away, but in some cases, they go to your lungs, and people have serious medical problems, and some people even die. So the answer to that is you don't want to sit in a flight for more than an hour or two without getting up and without stretching your legs, especially. There's also something you can take, which I use quite regularly, called Pignogenol, which is actually it's a generic over-the-counter. Of course, check with your doctor, but that will give you, it's like a blood thinner, but it's a natural pine bark, actually. And that's been recommended by a lot of physicians. Finally, when you go through TSA, what I do is I wear one of these vests, and I put everything that I want that would normally be in my pockets, I put it in the vest. So I simply take this off and put it in the receptacle for TSA, and everything goes through in one place. So you're not, being hassled by having to pull things out of your pockets and so forth. So those are some tips that we recommend. And finally, we have 2 resources. One is a hotline called, the number is, domestically is 800 FLYERS, FLYERS 6. You can also email us at hotline@flyersrights.org. And we have a staff that will provide you with free advice when you have an air travel problem, particularly with an airline.
Well, that's a lot of information, and it's very useful information. Maybe since we're talking about it, we can get a little bit more into the upcoming Thanksgiving weekend. But also from my end, I'm also a very frequent traveler, and I have 2 things I think they're very important. There should be added to it. Don't put medication in your checked baggage. Keep your medication on you, because you never know. Always consider, if you check a bag, it may get lost. But if it's valuable, you don't want to put cash or any of these items in there, a lot of all your credit cards. You want to keep it on you, what is very important. The other thing I noticed on my own flights recently, and I had to pay for not thinking about it quite a bit. I was sick for almost 2 weeks after I got back on a United flight from Washington to Las Vegas, where I was going actually what they call Polaris class. And I came from Europe, and it was wonderful. You had a nice bed, you can sleep, you keep warm, you have Fifth Avenue blankets and the whole spiel. But on the same plane, and I know I was flying the same plane, and that's why I choose that flight with a Polaris class from Washington to Las Vegas. Yes, you get the nice seat, but you don't get a blanket and you don't get a pillow. And it was freezing cold. Thinking you had this blanket, I left my own blanket. I usually keep for economy flights. I put it in the suitcase at customs. I put my little pillow I have in the suitcase at customs, and there you are for 4 hours. And literally, it was like you're like in the northern part of Alaska, and there was no escape. They didn't have any blankets, and their reasoning for this was it's a domestic flight. So does it mean when you go on a domestic flight you have lousy service, especially if you pay for Polaris, what is not any cheaper on the through ticket? I'm wondering, but this is definitely a tip from my end. Make sure you always plan for the worst. You never assume anything with airlines these days.
So blankets and pillows used to be standard on airlines, domestic as well as international, but not anymore. And in general, especially in the U.S., airlines do not compete on service. They compete on price, and they maybe compete a little bit on features. But good service costs money. Bad service, in general, saves the airline money. So, and with the lack of competition right now, and lack of any rules that prevents degradation of service, you have many problems. The computer systems break down with some regularity. Often planes are not available. Pilots are not available. There's no backups for equipment or personnel. And there are no regulations since deregulation in the US to prevent any of that. In fact, some airlines are now discontinuing any phone service. You will not be able to call them. They have unlisted phone numbers.
Well, that sounds like the normal thing these days, no matter if it's airline or no airlines. Getting people on the phone is a real challenge. And if you do get someone on the phone, you're connected to agents that have absolutely no authority to change anything in another country, in a huge call center, and may have never traveled on an airline before. So I think this is a normal undertaking. But if you look really at our overseas competition, things are going the other way. I recently traveled a lot on Qatar Airways, on Turkish Airlines, and some of these other airlines. And I have to say, anything from the call center to service is absolutely fantastic. But then you go to Lufthansa and forget customer service and forget call centers. You don't want to talk to them because they're so rude that half of the time they hang up on you. So it really depends on the airline, and I think where the airlines are located.
Yes, and some of these airlines that are providing good service, they are getting subsidies from their governments. In general, that's not the case in Europe or the United States, at least not normally. So that's another problem. But it's been our position, Flyers Rights, that we need to have much more robust rules to prevent airlines from just degrading service to literally the rock bottom. And that includes, squeezing people in seats. It includes all kinds of gotcha fees and a whole range of other things. But without delay compensation, they have in Europe, they have it internationally, there's no delay compensation in the United States. There's really no financial incentive for airlines to improve or even maintain service. We're seeing that more and more.
Yeah, now we're going into the Thanksgiving season, and we did an article just a couple of days ago. It expected to be the busiest Thanksgiving season ever when it comes to air travel. So we're going to expect a lot of people on airplanes. And you said there is a shortage of pilots, of staff. People can get sick. Computers they collapse easily. Look at what happened to Southwest Airlines. How is the industry, you think, prepared to deal with any surprises over the Thanksgiving weekend?
Well, it's unclear. I mean, if you asked Southwest in the beginning of December of last year whether they're going to have problems, they would have said, oh, no. But in fact, they canceled, Joe, over the Christmas season, over 10,000 flights. And they stranded between 5 and 10 million people. So they missed their holidays completely. So we really don't know. I think the situation is probably going to be better than it was last year. There may be a little bit fewer people because there's less pent-up demand, but we'll have to see. Right now, they have no regulations on their computer systems. They have no regulations that requires them to have a reserve capacity. In fact, some airlines operate with negative reserves, which means that on a perfect day, they're going to cancel a certain percentage of their flights.
So you're really in uncertain territory these days when it comes to specifically domestic air travel. And domestic travel is, from what I understand, becoming more and more important compared to international travel because of geopolitical difficulties in various parts of the world. Many people are hesitating to get on an international flight, or is this not the case?
Well, there has been a big increase. I think it's pent-up demand in flights from the U.S. to Europe and vice versa. But we'll have to see. The airlines had projected that they would keep increasing the demand. But since the summer, there's been a significant drop-off. Some people speculate we may be getting into a recession, and we may have a situation where people have spent their money to make up for the COVID years, and now they're having to do other things with the limited money they have.
And also the way people fly, probably even more on an international level, when it comes to airplane sizes like the Airbus 380 or the Boeing 747 wide-body planes that can sometimes hold up to 600 or more people. They're kind of history these days, right? We did a story on Emirates. They just welcomed their 125th Airbus 380, and this was the very last Airbus 380 manufactured by Airbus. There are not going to be no more. So airlines are going into smaller planes, so they don't have to follow the hub system. So right now, when you fly from A to B, many times you go from A to C before you get to B, and you can use larger aircraft. Is this going to be a trend in the United States as well? Because many airlines still have the hub system. I mean, you have American Airlines in Dallas, you have United Airlines in Houston or Chicago or San Francisco. It looks like we're not really following the same trend as some of our international airline friends are doing.
Well, there's a number of moving parts, but the planes, the smaller planes, for instance, the 747, Boeing 737 rather, that plane was designed for short and medium haul flights, but they have stretched it. They have increased the size of the engines, and they have made it essentially a long haul plane. They have done that. Airbus has done that with their Neo plane, and so now planes that were never meant to be flying over oceans, they're now flying over oceans. So the MAX, which had, of course, these horrible crashes, it's has more fuel efficiency, and the airlines are ordering them like crazy. And they're flying them across the North Atlantic. They're flying them from the West Coast to Hawaii, and they're flying them to South America with maybe one stop or something. And our concern is that on these planes, besides the issue of being cramped seating because they were never set up for the long distance flights, they also there is a danger when you have only two engines. What happens if one engine goes out? Well, the plane can still fly, but it can't necessarily fly for 3 or 4 hours over oceans. It has to fly at a lower altitude, and there are many other complicating factors. So we'll have to see how this works out. But the airline industry generally is going to what I would call medium-sized planes that will hold 200, 250. The other problem with that trend, though, is it stresses airports. And in the United States, we have airports that are over capacity, especially in places like New York City and Chicago. And there's no way that they're going to be able to keep up with the capacity unless they use larger airplanes or they build more airports. The United States is the only major country has not built any new airports for over 30 or 40 years. And one of the main strategies for making use of the airports we have with their runway capacity is to use larger planes. Because if your plane takes 500 people instead of 200 people, you have, of course, less takeoffs and landings. And we think there needs to be some look at, for continental flights, to either mandate or to at least encourage airlines to use larger planes. There's lots of flights between New York and LA every day, and they don't have to all be smaller engine planes.
No, I completely agree, especially living in Hawaii here for the last 35 years. I've seen it over the years from nice, starting with Pan American, going on 747. They were wonderful, very comfortable in all classes to go. And today, what you mentioned, the Neon or any of the 737, it's just a disgrace. You don't feel safe. You feel completely cramped. And even when you go to the toilet, there's hardly any room to turn around. And it is not very comfortable. I kind of feel like you better close your eyes and don't even look. And yes, I completely agree with you. It should not always be what this plane maybe can do from the engine. We always have to have a special and an additional layer of safety. And I agree with you. I'm very concerned with overwater flights over long stretches of waters, like between the West Coast and Hawaii, for example, to be on a 737. And I go out of my way not to book American Airlines, to look for the United Airlines 777 or for Hawaiian Airlines, where I know I have wide-body planes. I even pay a little bit more money. It's not all about saving $10 here or $10 there. Your safety and convenience also, I think, has a role for many passengers to choose what airline they book and what plane they book and what flight they book.
Right. Well, Flyers Rights, besides providing service to passengers, we're also the only organization that is totally focused on advocacy. We're the only organization that goes into court to enforce rights. We're the organization that represents airline passengers before the FAA on safety issues. And we, of course, are very active in the rulemaking process with DOT and TSA and others. And for that, we need donations. And as we come to Thanksgiving, we hope that people remember that Flyers Rights exists, and that we will continue to exist only if we receive support from the traveling public. And so, again, if you go on our website, you can see what we do, and you can also help us out, which is absolutely necessary. We receive no money from the industry. We receive no money from the government. It all comes from you, the flyer.
Now, your organization, and for the flyer, it's definitely something to invest in because it's going to pay back 1,000 times when you're able to actually win a court case and make things better for every one of us to fly. Are your members strictly consumers, or they're also trades?
We get some money from organizations that are safety oriented. We've gotten support from the Flight Attendants Union on occasion. We don't really receive any support, though, from any other trade or other organization. The pilots, believe it or not, although they say they're always for safety, which they are, of course, but they have never contributed to flyers' rights or to any safety organizations that I'm aware of.
I mean, if I was a travel agency or a tour operator, you want your passengers to fly comfortable and safe. And part of the corporate responsibility should be to support guys like you. Don't you think so?
I think so. And, you know, it used to be in the old days that 70, 80% of the tickets were booked through travel agencies. And when something went wrong, they could act as an advocate to help you out. But that's those numbers are reversed now. And, you know, 80% or more of travel is booked through websites where if something goes wrong, there's no one there to take responsibility. And that's why it's so important that flyers' rights exist, because if we didn't, things would be a lot worse. For example, you mentioned that when you call on the phone, it's hard to get someone. And when you do get someone, they don't usually want to help you, or they don't have the authority to help you. Well, one of the things that we do is we reach above those people at the call centers into middle management. And we have, we're on Twitter, X now, and we have some clout, if you will, to help get the exceptions made when it's necessary.
And yeah, no, absolutely. You have to go, and there are different levels. I mean, I shouldn't say, because I criticized here, the airline I fly the most is United Airlines, and I have to say for United Airlines that with my status I have at United, with 1K in global service, it's the highest status they offer. I don't have an issue reaching someone capable in a call center. I call a special number, and you talk to someone in the United States who actually has authority and is willing to help. So this is one of, I think, my main reason I stay loyal to United Airlines, and it's a big help if you can pick up the phone and actually something gets done. I have, by the way, the same status with American Airlines. I've been an executive, I don't know what they call it now, top tier, and they also have a special number, but they don't help you. So there is competition when it comes to call centers, how to treat frequent travelers, how to treat the general public, and all of this is room for improvement. And I think guys like you can definitely help to make airline know about it.
For those of us who are frequent travelers, of course, that their experience can be somewhat different. But you have to remember that the average passenger only flies once every 1 to 3 years.
Wow.
So that's a big difference.
Right.
Big difference. And not only are they going to have a lower status, perhaps, to get service, but also their ability to even know what their rights are is much, much lower. And we try to serve the whole broad spectrum of travelers. And of course, 90% of them are infrequent travelers.
No, they're fascinating subjects, and there's so much more I wanted to ask you and talk about. So hopefully we can have you back very soon. We're a little bit above our 30 minutes today, but this was interesting. So what I'm taking away from our conversation is to plan your Thanksgiving trip wisely, I like the idea of booking on an early flight. So if there is a delay, you can get on a later flight. Or even if you have a long distance flight, like what we do here from Hawaii, I always, if I have the time, plan to just stay a night at the airport hotel. It's fun. You can maybe see something from the city and you don't have to worry about all the stress changing planes, but it depends really on your schedule, how busy you are and what you want to do. But Paul, you have the last word, and yes, you have my full endorsement for our listeners and viewers to go to flyersright.org, I believe, right? And,
yes, flyersrights.org, and on social media, we're at Flyers Rights. And I must say, Jorgen, hats off to you for what you do with ETN, because it's very important, and you have in many ways made the information much more broadly available than it otherwise would be. We really thank you for that.
No, thank you, Paul. And if you stay on just one more second, but for everyone else, if you watch this and you wanted to watch it again, if you came in the middle of the thing, just stay tuned. Chances are we're going to repeat it for the next 24 hours. And then, of course, you can always find it on the breakingnewsshow.com. You will see an article on eturbonews.com. And of course, our YouTube channel is there where you can see all our past interviews and sessions. And Paul has been a guest a number of times, and hopefully we're going to see you a lot more. Thank you very much. Aloha from Hawaii, and happy Thanksgiving, and travel safe. And I talk to you soon.
Thank you.